This is World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with your host, Carl Gruber. World Awakenings is a podcast dedicated to opening your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how they play an all-important role in our daily life. So join Carl on this enlightening experience as he interviews metaphysical and spiritual experts to discuss, debate, and delve deeply into the hows and whys of this worldwide awakening.
Hey, thank you for joining us here on World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment, as we continue the journey to awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening. This is a journey to find the light, the truth, and the love, and go beyond the illusion of the chaos, insanity, judgment, and brutality of the world we see presented in the media, the internet, and even in our daily lives. The core mission of this show is based on the non-dualistic spiritual principles of the Modern Spiritual Guide, A Course in Miracles. Now, before we head off to meet our featured guests for this show, I'd like you to check out my ebook, The Jogger to Runner Book, a simple and easy instruction book on how to go from walking or jogging to becoming a runner, hopefully for a lifetime. I may be a certified law of attraction life coach, but I'm also a lifelong runner who has run 78 marathons, and I'm a running coach. So just scan the QR code you see on the screen right now, or click the link below in the show notes to get your ebook today of The Jogger to Runner Book for only $1.99. All right, let's dive into our featured guest here. And our featured guest for this show is Susan Michel. Susan has been a professional contract trainer, public speaker, and has many years of modeling and acting experience in New York City. However, the course of her life changed drastically when she attempted suicide twice in her early 20s, which consequently led her to discover and study the Modern Spiritual Guide, A Course in Miracles. Her incredible life experiences have led her to author a book called Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. And now Susan is a well-known spiritual coach and speaker. So with that, welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you, Carl. It's so great to be here. I love talking about the Course in Miracles. It's my favorite thing to do. It is just a transformational truth that has changed my life. And its mission is to enable us to connect to our true peace, love, joy, and happiness. And it works if you work it. I know that for a fact.
Well, I'll tell you what, you and I are both totally and completely immersed in our daily lives and study of A Course in Miracles. And we're going to dive into that much further here. You know, one of my favorite topics. Actually, it's been a while since I've had a teacher of A Course in Miracles on here. So really, I'm already really excited about that. But I want to find out a little bit more about you so our viewers and listeners will understand. Unfortunately, it seems your young life followed an all too familiar story of bullying, lack of self-worth, mental trauma. Can you tell us what occurred in your young life that caused you to take such drastic action in trying to kill yourself?
Yeah, I was bullied for years in elementary school. So I always felt like I was on the outside looking in. I always felt like I was separate, which is a core ego belief uh, based on A Course in Miracles. But that mentality, that thought system was embedded in me. I mean, I've done a lot of looking at my childhood. I think a lot of my belief system got passed down to me by my parents, especially my father. Um, but when I was in elementary school, I would walk around with my shoulders slumped over, my head down. I had my arms in front of my chest, protecting myself. I would never talk. I was very, very quiet. During recess, I remember I stood by myself on the fence watching all the other children play in groups, and I so desperately longed to fit in. I remember I had two children in elementary school that haunted me the most. One was a female, and she would always kind of flip the back of my shoes with her front foot. She would kind of my shoes would come off, and then she would laugh at me. And then there was another heavy set boy, and I remember on the school bus he would always make fun of me. So I just felt very shut down. That's how I felt as a child. And as I got older, I started to become attractive. So I thought by becoming attractive, I could escape my past. But there were so many internal demons that I never confronted. And that's what ultimately caused my suicidal depression at the age of 20. But between the children at school and the emotional and verbal abuse inflicted upon me by my father, I think I grew up extremely insecure. That was my story.
Well, and that's really, really interesting because my previous guest is a psychiatrist, Dr. Nina Cerfolio, and she actually has a book about terrorism, and she had a spiritual awakening through all this. And she talks about bullying being rampant and of epidemic proportions, and actually causes some of these school shooters because they don't know they're just they don't know any other way to respond to it. And so the fortunate part for you, and we're going to get into this, was you went the correct path and found A Course in Miracles. But one last thing I want to ask. So you finally felt in your early 20s that you just couldn't take it anymore and decided the best course of action was to end it all. What happened?
I wanted to comment too on what you said about the school shootings. I think that's extremely interesting because I know a lot of these students that end up shooting their classmates, they project their anger. So they're projecting their anger outwards because they just can't own the pain. I love that line, own the pain. We need to own the pain in order to get to the other side of it. But what I did, I didn't project my anger outwards. I internalized my anger. I internalized all the darkness that I didn't know how to process. So I tried to kill myself. But it's the same whether we project our anger outwards or we internalize our anger. I was trying to kill myself. What's happening is we're not owning the pain. We're not sitting with what needs to be felt in order to get to the other side of it. So what led to my suicide attempt, to answer that question, is that there were so many different factors that went into it. I mean, I didn't know anything about psychology, so I didn't know where all these insecure feelings were coming from. I didn't know anything about A Course in Miracles, so I didn't know there was a way out of all this pain. And ultimately, what I did is I tried to look as good as I could on the outside to hide the felt that I felt so insecure and disgusting on the inside. I also thought that if only I could get what I wanted in the external world, everything that I was not happy with internally would go away. So, what I did is I proceeded to get plastic surgery to make myself as perfect as possible on the outside at about the age of 20. I got a rhinoplasty, which is a nose job, and a breast augmentation. I got my breasts enhanced. Then I worked out, I dieted. I went to a top Boston photographer and got him to put together a portfolio of pictures for me. And I looked so good on the outside. And then I got the top Boston modeling agency to represent me, so at this point I could say I was a real fashion model. And I thought once I could say I was a real fashion model, then I would feel good enough, because I never felt good enough. But what happened is I felt even worse, because I got everything I wanted on the outside. I could say I was a real fashion model, but I still had all those insecurities lurking within me. So at this point, I felt hopeless. I felt like there was no way out of all those uncomfortable feelings. So that is what led to my suicide attempt. Um, because getting what I wanted in the external world did not satisfy that inner angst. Nothing from the external world can ever satisfy our inner angst. That's what A Course in Miracles teaches us. But again, I hadn't found A Course in Miracles at that time.
Well, and then so let's go to that. You found uh, the A Course in Miracles when you attended a lecture by the current presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson, who's been a longtime teacher of A Course in Miracles. Tell us about that.
So that was 5 years later. I was about 25 years old. I was living in New York City. I started modeling again at that time. And one of the women that I met at one of my bookings invited me to a seminar in Times Square by Marianne Williamson. I had never heard of Marianne Williamson. And I remember listening to her speak, and it was the first time that any words ever hit me to my core. Her words were so profound, so clear, so empowering. It was just like I felt like I had found my path home to heaven, to peace, love, joy, and happiness. It's just, you know, I found something for the first time that made sense. And I'm so grateful that Marianne Williamson was able to interpret the book so clearly and articulately.
That's interesting too. I would love to have Marianne on the show, but she's a little booked up right now in her presidential run for in America. But yeah, who knows? Maybe in the future. So, although I know I've been talking about the ACIM, A Course in Miracles, for years now, and most of my listeners understand and know, but let's talk more about A Course in Miracles itself so our listeners who don't know about it can understand more of what it is. I don't know, where would you start with it?
Course in Miracles is a non-dualistic thought system, which means only the love is real. The introduction states nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And that summarizes the book in 3 sentences. And it's so profound. To describe it, I think a good way to start is to compare it to the traditional religious doctrine. Um, A Course in Miracles was scribed by Helen Schuckman and William Thetford, two professors of medical psychology at Columbia University in Manhattan. I've learned a lot about them recently. I guess Helen Schuckman was about 14 years older than Bill Thetford. Um, and Helen started to hear um, words, people that believe in the Course in Miracles the way I do, and you do, I'm sure, believe that the words of Jesus Christ were scribed through Helen Schuckman to create the Course in Miracles. Helen Schuckman was conservative in theory, atheistic in belief, I believe he picked her because he didn't want religious doctrine interfering with his message. He wanted a clear channel. And it would make a lot of sense and she was Jewish. She was a Jewish woman. So it would make sense that he would pick someone like her who had no religious dogma, within them. And as she scribed his words, he pointed out the flaws in religion. I grew up in a Lutheran church. So, what I learned that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. Jesus Christ died for my sins. And I think as a child, this provoked a lot of guilt, because when I went to church, I saw the crucifix. I saw this skinny man with his head hanging down, blood gushing out of his body, a nail through his right arm, a nail through his left arm, a nail through his feet. And he died for my sins. I always felt so guilty. And A Course in Miracles is telling us no. A Course in Miracles is telling us, yes, Jesus Christ is the Son of God. However, we are all sons and daughters of our Creator. We all have the potential to do as Jesus did. Now, when I started learning this was such an empowering thought. Also, they talk about the resurrection. Course in Miracles said, or the crucifixion, I should say. A Course in Miracles says the only message of the crucifixion is that people's projections have no power over us. People's anger have no power over us. People's fear has no power over us. Jesus Christ showed us that we can tap into the power of love and forgiveness no matter what's happening to us in the external world. A Course in Miracles focuses on innocence. We don't grow closer to God through guilt. We don't grow closer to God by condemning ourselves for our sins. We grow closer to God to connecting to our innocence. Lately, I've been saying this mantra to myself. I embody the essence of innocence because I think innocence, it's such an empowering thought, and that's the only way we can connect to God. I mean, the religious God is very good and loving when we do what he says, but if we ever disobey him, oh my gosh, we might get the wrath of God. This is what the traditional Christian church says. A Course in Miracles says God is unconditionally loving, unconditionally supportive, unconditionally compassionate, and he never gets angry at us. He is incapable of anger because that's not who he is. The only person that ever condemns us is ourself. God is not capable of condemnation because he only sees our innocence. He only sees our goodness. God does not have to forgive us because he has never condemned us. The only people that need to forgive us is us, and once we can forgive ourselves totally and completely, then we can connect to our innocence. So A Course in Miracles, in my mind, it's just a truth. I guess technically it's a philosophy. I call it a truth, but it's based on innocence. And in the traditional Christian religion, there's heaven and hell. In A Course in Miracles, there's heaven, there is no hell. In the traditional Christian church, there's God, there's the devil. In A Course in Miracles, there's God and nothing else. However, A Course in Miracles version of the devil is the ego, is what they call that. But the ego is an illusion. So it's not really there. So we don't need to fight it. We just need to release it.
Wow, wow, beautiful, beautiful explanation. Just a couple things. I'm so glad that you pointed out that there can be no confusion between A Course in Miracles and religion. And religion, of course, is makes you feel guilty. I mean, that's the whole way all the organized religions of the world have done in order to control the population and that type of thing. And the Course is what they call non-dualistic spirituality, and also the fact that Helen Schuckman described this. I mean, the book has been around for 50 years now. I believe it came out in 1975, and hundreds of millions of people around the world now study it, and it's changed the modern psyche as to who we are. And as you were explaining it, I'm visualizing myself as a viewer or listener who's never heard any of this before. And you and I were talking about this before we came on the recording here. The first time you read A Course in Miracles, you're like, what? It's because it's written kind of in Shakespearean style, iambic pentameter. And I was never a big student of Shakespeare because, it was hard to, what is this language? But once you stay with it and you start to realize that, wait a second, everything I've ever known or thought or believed about the world is an illusion. It's just like, whoa. And you've been studying the Course for 35 years, I believe. I've been studying it for 20. And as you stay with it, it really starts to change your life. But for you, I mean, what a beautiful change in your life from almost committing suicide to being a beautiful proponent and teacher of A Course.
Thank you. Yeah. A Course in Miracles is a reversal in thought system. When I first picked up the book at a Marianne Williamson lecture, I could not understand it. It was like you said, it has Shakespearean language, and it was extremely difficult for me to understand. That's why I would listen to Marianne Williamson a lot on cassette tape, actually. I had tons of her cassette tape. I guess that gives away my age, but that's what I did. And even now, there are so many great interpreters of A Course in Miracles. I read A Course in Miracles directly, but I also listen to a lot of different students and teachers interpret the Course for me because it is a bit dry, I think. I don't know how else to say it. It's a bit dry. I mean, when you listen to it, I have it on Audible. I have two versions on Audible. Yeah, I mean, when you really digest the information that it's conveying, it is so empowering. And light bulbs go off and tears come to my eyes. And I say, I get it, I get it. And then, A Course in Miracles also emphasizes that intellectual understanding is nothing compared to going out in the world and experiencing what it's talking about, experiencing a miracle. It teaches us how to be conduits to express God's love to our brother. It's miraculous. But to listen to the words can be challenging. It's challenging to listen to the words. So we were talking about one of your guests, The Disappearance of the Universe, Gary Renard. I mean, he's a wonderful interpreter of A Course in Miracles. I think that was the first book that my husband started listening to because he's a new student of A Course in Miracles. He just picked it up 5 years ago. So he would listen to the disappearance of the universe over and over and over. I still don't think he's read the text because it's difficult to understand. It's amazing, it's transformational, it's life-changing. I love it. I mean, I love it more than anything in the world. But it's difficult to understand.
And you again, this is something you and I discussed shortly before we came on the recording. Gary's been on the show, and I met Gary And his book, Disappearance of the Universe, is one of the best primers you could ever have to before you read A Course in Miracles. It really does lay the groundwork so you can understand it and not go into it completely cold. But, Gary and I were both talking once about the first time we ever read A Course in Miracles. And here's one of the greatest teachers of A Course in Miracles in the world. And Gary said, well, he read it and he goes, what the hell is this? But, now he's a great teacher. But, A Course in Miracles is a mind training program. It is about atonement, undoing all the insane concepts that the ego has ever taught us, that we are separate in a body. And once you start to grasp on this concept, it moves your mind to a little better place. And in many ways, you don't take the drama and trauma of life so to heart, where you're ready to kill yourself.
A Course in Miracles tells us, and this is a very heavy concept, the world is not real. There is no world. What we're seeing externally is simply a reflection of an internal condition. So when there is something within us that has not yet been healed, what we do is we project that onto the outside world, and then we blame the other person for the angst that we're experiencing. But A Course in Miracles is saying there is no other person. Now, this is a really heavy concept, and I, have been studying it for 34 years now, but I still have challenges in my life, because it's hard when someone else triggers us to take full responsibility for it. When that car cuts us off, it's hard not to give them the middle finger and beep our horn. We all have pain points within us. I also came up with this 4P process. When life triggers us, instead of reacting to whatever it is, we can respond from a place of compassion. And to do that, the 4Ps that I came up with is to pause, just pause, then own the pain, process the pain, and pray. And it's not necessarily in that sequential order, but once we can stop blaming the external world for our internal anxiety, we can really take responsibility for the feelings, and we can heal a lot faster. I think that is, like you said, Course in Miracles is a mind training process program, but it's teaching us to take responsibility for our darkness so we can see that it has no power over us. I also, in my book, and I quote a lot, 2 lines from the Invitation poem by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. What she writes is she writes in the middle of her poem, she writes, I want to know if you can sit with pain, yours and mine, without trying to hide it or fade it or fix it. Now, that's not easy to do. It takes discipline, it takes constraint. And then the next line immediately after that one is, I want to know if you can dance with joy, if you can allow the ecstasy to fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. So why is that line about joy immediately after the line about pain? Is because the earth, it's a classroom. So whatever has not yet been healed within us is going to get triggered by outside circumstances. So that's why triggers are our teachers. So when we can take responsibility for what is triggered within us, that's how we will be able to release it And on the other side of our pain, there is so much joy. And that has happened to me time and time again in this lifetime. I think we're all the same. We're all born into this world with certain unhealed pain points. I think if we were enlightened, we probably wouldn't be born into this earthly classroom, but we're all born with internal pain points, and then that's why triggers are blessings, because triggers are showing us what is within us that has not yet been healed. And then when we can just take responsibility for it, when we can give it to the Holy Spirit and ask him for help, then we can release it and we can access the truth about who we are. And who we really are is we are a part of God. We are peace, love, joy, and happiness. And
Wow.
it's so empowering.
Yeah, who doesn't want that? You mentioned earlier one of the lines right in the beginning of the book, even before the main text starts. And this resonated with me the very first time I read it, just like it did with you. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And when you first read that too, you go, huh? But when you contemplate it, it's really freeing. But my favorite line, and I say this to myself every single day, line 1, page 1, there's no order of difficulty in miracles. It's a course in miracles, right? And when you think about that, wow, that's incredible. But I do want to find out about your book. You have this awesome book that I think just came out a few months ago, Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. Why did you write this book and why now?
Yeah, I have it right here. It's available on Amazon. Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. I teach the transformational of A Course in Miracles. And it's something that I have always wanted to write. It took me approximately 10 years to write. I didn't write straight through. I just kept working on it and working on it with some different coaches as well, because I'm not a professional writer. I do think my book is very well written. And I believe I was born to study and to teach A Course in Miracles. So to write about A Course in Miracles and to speak about A Course in Miracles, I mean, I believe that's my purpose. I know it's my passion. So I use a lot of mistakes that I've made in the past, a lot of times in my life where my ego has surfaced, and I write about them and how using A Course in Miracles principles could have avoided a lot of the pain that I went into. I use a lot of excerpts from A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is difficult to understand, so I sprinkle a lot of Course in Miracles quotes in my book. So through what I write before and after the quote, it makes the Course in Miracles excerpt more easy to understand, easier to understand. And it's not a long book. It's about 200 pages. But I'm very proud of it. I think it's great for new students of A Course in Miracles, or I have a friend who's been studying it for about as long as I have, and she got a lot out of it also. So for new students and longtime students, it's a great read.
Yeah, that's just exciting. I published a book in 2022 and called True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction. And much of it is based, almost all of it is based on a Course in Miracles. But again, I think the biggest thing, you and I are making this pretty clear, that when you first become a course student, that it is hard to decipher and let all those egoic paradigms we've been led to believe are the truth, let them go. Now, there's 3 main elements to A Course in Miracles. The first is the main text. Then the second element is the workbook for students, and then finally the manual for teachers. I know some people decide to start with one element or the other rather than page one. What worked for you, and what would you suggest for somebody to begin to read it?
I started with the text. I just read the text over and over and over. That's what worked for me. My husband started with the workbook for students, and that's what worked for him. Um, there's no right, there's no wrong. I also actually started before even delving into A Course in Miracles. I read A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. I would listen to her cassette tapes. They were on cassette at the time when I started listening to her. Now she has tons of podcasts. But her book, Return to Love, I thought was a brilliant introduction to A Course in Miracles. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. I mean, people are drawn to different parts of a course. I guess it would be to open it up and see what is more intriguing to you, see what makes more of an impact. The text is intellectual. For me, it helps to have an intellectual foundation. The workbook for students, there's 365 lessons, one for each day of the year. Today is actually the 39th day of 2024. So I start each day now off with a Course in Miracles lesson. Today's lesson is My Holiness is My Salvation. And then what A Course in Miracles instructs us to do is to, meditate on the subject of the lesson. And that's extremely helpful. But I didn't start out with the workbook. I started out with the text. And then the manual for teachers, I mean, that's a bunch of questions and answers. And that's very interesting as well. But there's no right, there's no wrong. Um,
Well, it's interesting. I too, just like you, I start my day with study of A Course in Miracles. Of course, I got to feed my cat first, but and then I sit down and so again, talking about how it may be very difficult to understand at first. Lesson number one of the workbook says nothing I see in this room means anything, and you go, what? I can see those shoes over there, and that type of thing. But you have to stay with it. It really is something incredible with that. So yeah, I think that depends on the person, and I think spirit will lead the person to which element to start with first. The way they think that they will handle it the best. Wow, this is just a beautiful discussion. I mean, my gosh, there are study groups, ACIM study groups, and here's the interesting thing, Susan. I've never been in a ACIM study group, but doing what I do with this podcast and have beautiful teachers on like you, it's kind of my study group too. But if somebody wants support and understanding interpreting A Course in Miracles, a study group would be a great way to go.
yes, yes. When I was younger, I would always I went to a lot of in-person study groups, a lot of different ones. I had my own study group in Manhattan for a number of years. I learned so much. And discussing A Course in Miracles with other people is just such a great way to learn it. Now there's a lot of study groups, but everything's on Zoom. So you can be wherever you are in the world and study with people. I speak twice a week in Gather for A Course in Miracles. It's a platform that I started doing through an app called Pal Talk, and now it's live on Zoom. And I do that. It's called Gather for A Course in Miracles, and I speak twice a week. And I speak with other students. I speak with other teachers. What I say may prompt a response from them. What they say kind of prompts a response from me. I mean, A Course in Miracles tells us that we kind of gain greater knowledge when more than one person is together. So I think to just join and study A Course in Miracles together is a great way to learn it.
Yeah, And that is so beautiful. That's great that you do that study group. Now, let's go with what you do right now. I mean, you're that's what you do full time. You're a spiritual coach and author and speaker, right?
Um, yeah, I mean, live my life to learn and to teach A Course in Miracles. And yep,
What's your website? Because people
my
can.
website is surrendertojoy.net,
Okay.
www.surrendertojoy.net. My book is Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. It is available on Amazon for $12.96. So yeah, and
Definitely
it's
go there and check out her website. I would like to ask you this. What would be your advice to someone who now finds themselves in the same place you found yourself in your early 20s, like there's no point to living anymore? What would be your advice to them?
yeah, that's a really good question. The first, I mean, if you are in complete darkness and if you're in complete pain, the first thing I would say is just stop, don't do it. Call a suicide hotline. I mean that's what you need to do first. You need to just talk to somebody because you're not in your right mind. Um, what I needed to learn being at that point of suicide, after I initially just stopped and didn't do it, is to realize that the pain that is overwhelming is something that needs to be felt in order to heal itself. I mean, depression is a block. I have a specific chapter in my book about this. Many people think that depression and sadness are the same thing, but they're not. Depression is a block, and to just stay in the depression, that's what can lead to a suicidal outcome. Sadness is something that needs to be felt in order for healing to occur. So just to start to step into those uncomfortable emotions is an essential first step in getting out of a dark place. I mean, that's something else that happened to me because, and I think this is what led to my depression, is that my family would not allow me to feel the feelings that needed to be felt in order for me to heal. So when I got angry, I got in a lot of trouble. When I got sad, my father and my mother also was so uncomfortable with their own sadness, they would not accept the sadness in me. So I never expressed my sadness. And because I couldn't express my feelings, that's when I shut down. That's when I got depressed, and that's what led to my suicide. But the first thing is to really just allow yourself to feel the uncomfortable feelings. And by owning the pain, that's how we allow ourselves to heal. That's how we open our heart. That's how we develop our vulnerability. That's how we're able to connect to another person. I felt too at that time in my life, I couldn't connect to myself. So therefore, I couldn't connect to another person, and I felt very separate and I felt very alone. So after initially just stopping, calling a suicide hotline. I mean, when you're again in the midst of the pain, if you're really thinking about suicide, you just talk to somebody, get yourself out of that place. But then after that, the healing process comes from stepping into uncomfortable emotions. And once you allow yourself to feel those uncomfortable emotions, then you feel the peace, love, joy, and happiness, and the feeling of connectedness. I don't even think that's a word, but the feeling of connection on the other side. So what I couldn't do, and what led to my suicide attempt, is the fact that I wouldn't allow myself to feel my feelings because my parents never taught me that. And I was afraid of what was inside of me. You know, A Course in Miracles has this great line about darkness, and I love this line, and this is in my book. This is the escape from darkness. The escape from darkness involves two stages. First, the recognition that darkness cannot hide. This step usually entails fear. Second, the recognition that there is nothing you want to hide, even if you could. This step brings escape from fear. When you have become willing to hide nothing, you will not only be willing to enter into communion, but will also understand peace and joy. So it's allowing our darkness to surface, giving it to the Holy Spirit so he can help us to heal our pain. And also in that paragraph, so many of us try to appear together on the outside. We want everyone to think that we're fine, that we're good, that we have a great life, that we have money, and we have everything, all these external possessions. But A Course in Miracles is saying, God just wants us to keep it real. God wants us to give us our pain so he can take it from us and help us to heal it. When you have become willing to hide nothing, you will not only be willing to enter into communion, but will also understand peace and joy. We need to just open ourselves up so the Holy Spirit can help us to heal. And we all have access to him at each and every moment.
So if you're a viewer or listener who's in a very bad place right now considering ending your life, or if you're a person in a very bad place who's considering picking up a gun and going to shoot up a mall or a school, what Susan just said, take this to heart. There is hope that you can change that. You can come out of that dark cocoon, and it really is possible. Look, Susan did it, and millions of other people have. And we're talking to Susan Michel. She is an amazing teacher and author of A Course in Miracles teachings. And what I would like to ask you at the end here, and this is a big topic, so we'll try to keep on it a little bit here. Forgiveness is one of the key elements of A Course in Miracles, learning it. Now, with the kids that tormented you in school and your father and your parents who it was hard for you to deal with the way they reacted to you, have you forgiven them?
I believe I have. I work on forgiveness every day. I mean, A Course in Miracles tells us that the only way we can connect to him is by forgiving our brother. And when we're forgiving our brother, we're forgiving ourselves. So no matter what happens to us, on some level, we've created that circumstance. And by forgiving this other person, we forgive ourselves, because the mind is all encompassing. Projection makes perception. So when we're seeing the guilt in our brother, we're feeling the guilt in ourselves. That's how the mind works. So what the ego tries to do is, the ego, which is always a negative based on A Course in Miracles interpretation of it, what the ego tries to do is, the ego tries to project what it doesn't want to take responsibility for onto another person. And so by blaming the other person, it will feel at peace. That's the ego. But it doesn't work like that. A Course in Miracles is saying, no, when you blame the other person for something, you're going to feel guilty. And guilty is keeping you from God. When I forgive my brother, I feel my own innocence. So I'm not forgiving my brother for their sake, even though they might benefit. I'm forgiving my brother so I can feel my innocence, so I can connect to God. I'm forgiving for my sake. I mean, again, I guess you can compare it to, the traditional teachings of the Christian church. They teach forgiveness, but it's coming from a place of superiority. I'm going to forgive because I will be the better person, and this is how I'm going to get brownie points to get into heaven sooner than my brother. So it's kind of like a self-righteous kind of forgiveness. A Course in Miracles is saying, no, the reason to forgive is because what you're seeing is not true. The only way we can feel God's forgiveness for us is by forgiving our brother. The only way we can connect to our innocence is by forgiving our brother. Also, self-forgiveness is so important. I need to, and I worked on this today again, I need to forgive myself for any perceived mistakes that I might have made. And I need to, because forgiving another person is the same as forgiving myself. And it's only by connecting to my innocence can I feel my true power. Because when I do not forgive, that means I'm holding on to guilt. And when I hold on to guilt, I can't hear God. I just can't. It's like a dark cloud covers the truth that is within me. A Course in Miracles says forgiveness is not needed in heaven. Heaven is a place of peace, love, joy, and happiness because there is no condemnation. But forgiveness is needed here on earth because there is so much condemnation and guilt and egoic thinking down here. So forgiveness is our way out of hell. And it's not easy either. It's not easy. Forgiveness is not easy. I mean, you can see all the animosity on the news. I mean, all over. There's so much resentment. There's so much unforgiveness. There's so much guilt in the world. But A Course in Miracles is telling us it is the only way to connect to our true nature, the only way. And another thing that's really interesting is a lot of people will say, oh, well, I can forgive, but I can't forget. And that is nonsensical. That makes no sense at all, because I think the reason that they say that, or I might have said that in the past also, is that we feel like if we forgive and we forget, the same thing might happen to us in the future. So we always have to be on guard. But A Course in Miracles is saying once you can truly forgive, and that means forgetting, well, then that is a lesson that has been learned. That same scenario will not happen to you in the future because you've released it. There's no more learning that needs to take place in that area. So true forgiveness will kind of stop that scenario from happening in your life. It's when we don't forgive that the lesson keeps getting repeated back to us because we have not yet learned it. Did I say that clearly? Does that make sense?
That was a beautiful explanation of forgiveness. Thank you, and much, much needed. And we're going to wind up here, but I would just like to say if you're a person who hears multiple voices telling you different things, blah, 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 I think we all do in some way, shape, or form. There's the way that you can tell if it's the ego or if it's the Holy Spirit is the ego always will speak first, the loudest and the harshest. And the Holy Spirit will always speak softly and quietly in a beautiful, peaceful manner and say, choose again, my son, choose again, you are loved. And so I just love that. And that helps me get through every day. So Susan Michel, you are amazing. I love having you on. You're such a great teacher, of course. One last time, your website address and what's the best way people can connect with you?
Yeah, my website address is surrendertojoy.net, www.surrendertojoy.net. My email is susanmichel88@gmail.com. My website is the best way to connect with me, and my email is on my website as well.
Okay, yeah, and Michelle is spelled Michel, right?
Correct. SUSANMICHEL88@gmail.com.
All right, Susan, it's been a blast. Thank you so much. Such a lovely conversation. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been great. You have so much knowledge yourself. Thank you. Thank you.
This has been another episode of World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with host Carl Gruber, a certified Law of Attraction life coach. We welcome you to tune in to each and every episode of World Awakenings as we open your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to the truth of all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how much they play an all-important role in our moment-to-moment daily life. Much love and light to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning into World Awakenings.